Oh, cool, cool. Mhm. Okay. Okay. We have one person in the chat. Welcome. I think I know who this is. I think it's my guy Warsaw HD Graphics. Am I right? If I'm right, just type in the chat. Also, can you hear me? If you can hear me right, I can hear you. I just want to make sure. Okay, we got a yes. Just right, I can hear you if you can hear. Well, I guess he answered the question, so he must be able to hear me. Mm, 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 mm. Actually, let me just turn on the chat here to see. Okay, it works. Okay, awesome. Well, to be honest, don't know when other people show up, unfortunately. Wait, what's unfortunate? Anyways, I'm planning on starting in like 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, so we have two people. Welcome, Historical Events. Very glad to see you here. Okay, so let's just get started, and then if more people come, hey, honestly, it's okay if you're watching a football game. It doesn't really matter, as long as you check this from time to time. All right, so let's just get started so we don't waste any more time. So here it is, and we will start off the slideshow. Um, so yeah, can everyone see the slideshow? I'm just gonna go back here to check. Okay, I think you guys can. It's showing up on this screen here, so but yeah, just type yes, W, whatever, if you can see the presentation in the chat. Okay, awesome. Okay, so let's just get started. So first of all, what exactly is this? Well, this is a presentation that I've made on the different kinds of traditional clothing that we find around the world. And yeah, essentially the point is kind of to compare. just see what people were wearing. So first of all, let's start off with some definitions. What do I define as traditional clothing? Well, essentially anything pre-industrial. Now, of course, that covers a long period of time, but generally it's whatever was worn right before the Industrial Revolution. So we're trying to think here about generally the 18th and 19th century. That's generally the time frame. Could be a little earlier, especially in the case of some Native American people, but in general, right, this is 18th and 19th century style of clothing. What inspired me to make this? Well, quite simply, it was just um, a desire to, I guess, see more cool looking clothes than, kind of the sterile, mass-produced stuff that we're all wearing today. And I'm just as guilty of this as anyone else. I'm wearing sweatpants right now. But nevertheless, it was kind of to compare, to see what clothing people used to wear and to see how that varied across the world. And so, yeah, without further ado, we can just get started. I'm just going to quickly check the chat once again, just to see if anyone's there. All right. Doesn't seem to be the case, so let's get started. So first of all, our first category is European clothing, and to no one's surprise, this is the kind of clothing that was common in Europe. Although it was not just that. But yeah, let's start off by just describing a little bit what the main features of European clothing was, and then we can look at some examples. So the main distinction is the wearing of trousers and hats by men. And while there were a very small number of exceptions, this style was generally universal among Europeans. Among a lot of Germanic people, it was more common for men to wear stockings, and so they weren't wearing trousers necessarily as we recognize them today. For women, hats were optional, but women would wear dresses. And most of these would go down to the ankle, although among Western Slavic people, it was common to see dresses that would only go down past the knees. And of course, in terms of footwear, shoes were common in Western Europe, while boots were more preferred in Eastern Europe. However, European clothing is not a completely accurate name because this was also the style of Turkish and Iranian people, and so they will also be included in this part. Okay, and so without further ado, let's just get started looking at some of the examples. So first one here is Albanian. Now, I know this kind of breaks the rules. This guy isn't really wearing trousers, but it was similar enough. And yeah, most of the other ones don't look that similar. By the way, one more thing in the chat. I'll generally try to spend around like 10 to 15 seconds per slide so it doesn't take forever to finish. But if you guys want to remain longer in a particular slide, just write it in the chat. I'm just going to check the chat one more time. Okay, historical events. You're telling me people didn't always wear three-piece morning suits? Nope. Crazy enough, they didn't. All right. So yeah, that's just what's going on. Hopefully we get more people. Oh, okay, there you go. PKW. I was waiting for you. Okay, don't worry, you didn't miss anything. We're on the very first slide. Um, so yeah, good to see you here. And yeah, so now let's get back. Second example is Russian clothing. So Russian clothing is pretty interesting, as you can see, a lot of white being worn. And yeah, one interesting thing is that women would wear their hair very, very long. And it was actually a tradition to not have it cut whatsoever. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, PKW is a little bit Russian, but we can just have him confirm that in the chat real quickly. Let's see. Beaver, when is beaver felt used? Not 100% sure. Okay, we'll just wait like 10 seconds. Okay, yes, yes, he has no clue. Okay, next, Rusin. So these are not Russians. These are a separate people. And yeah, I think they live in Poland, I want to say. But yeah, I always thought their clothing looked pretty cool. And this guy has kind of an interesting face. But yeah, Rusin. Or actually, I think they're maybe in Ukraine. I'm not sure. But it's a very small group. I just thought they had cool clothing. All right, next, Ukrainian. Obviously, no introduction needed. You can see Ukrainian clothing is pretty unique, especially with the red boots, the baggy pants for the men. And yeah, pretty interesting. All right, let's move on to the next one. Bulgarian. This is one of my favorites. I think Bulgarian clothing looks very, very nice. A lot of jewelry, that kind of stuff. And also, whoever made this picture did a very good job. All right, we're just gonna check the chat once again. Rusin are in Poland and Ukraine, from my knowledge. Okay, interesting. All right, let's go back. All right, actually, you know what? I think I will just put this over here so that way we're only moving one. There we go. Okay, Bulgaria's underrated. Okay, next, Macedonian. Now, this is a bit controversial because Bulgarians will claim that Macedonians are the same as them. I mean, obviously, we can see the similarity between the two, but I think it still looks pretty cool. Very nice red socks, all that. All right, next we get to Serbs. They're mortal enemy of the Bulgarians and of many other people in Europe, I should say. And we can kind of see these, black hats with red tops. They're very common, as well as these very thick white socks that we have over here. All right, moving on, get to Montenegrins. Wait, and their clothing almost looks Turkish in my opinion, like at least for the men especially. Like I wouldn't have been surprised if this guy was a Turk or something, but he's not. He's Montenegrin. Okay, moving on next, we get to Croat people. And again, we can kind of see all the similarities here among the Balkans people, especially with the hat and all that. Yes, a little bit about them. All right, now we get to the Czechs, and this is sort of what I was talking about earlier. Sort of shorter dresses for women. So these are more going down to the ankle rather than the knee. But interestingly enough, though, they're still quite wide. So it is a bit surprising. And yeah, sort of the same kind of hat with the Czechs as we saw with the Serbs. And yeah, this is what I was talking about as well with the boots. So the boots were much more common footwear in Eastern Europe. All right, and then we get to Poles. So Polish people, sort of the same vibe we get over here, very similar stuff. We'll just go back to chat real quick. Let's see. Serbia is a part of Hungary. Montenegro is a part of Bosnia. Croatia is a part of Czech, are a part of Poland. Okay, I see. Trying to start a war here in the chat. Okay. Next, get to Latvian. I just thought Latvian clothing was pretty cool, especially the men. Cool white suit sort of going on here. Nice stuff for the women as well. All right, moving on. Then we get to Lithuanian. And there's quite a lot of embroidery. And in case you don't know what that word is, embroidery is basically just all the patterns. So the patterns here, here, all across the dress here, all this stuff. This is all known as embroidery. So it'll be a topic brought up more throughout the presentation. All right, then we get to Welsh. And I'm sure you guys will probably notice one thing immediately, which is these interesting hats.
This is the worst by far.
Oh yeah, my brother's also here, so if you hear him commenting, that's why. But yeah, Welsh were known as pretty much the only people in the world who had these interesting, almost top hat looking things. And they were very popular for a while in the 19th century, and then they quickly became old-fashioned and not cool anymore.
They actually look like they're dressed for Halloween.
Okay, and then we get to Breton people. And yeah, so this is the first one with, well, not the first one, Russians. But yeah, a couple of these will have two pictures just because I felt that like one picture did not adequately represent everything. And also because later on this channel, I'll do more deep dives into individual styles. Here, this is more an overview. But yeah, this is some of the Breton stuff. Brittany is in France, in case you don't know. So this guy over here does look quite French, but he is in fact a Breton. And then this painting over here is done by one of my favorite artists, William Adolphe Bouguereau. All right, moving on, we got Irish, pretty simple stuff. Not much to see here. Yeah. All right, and then we get to Scottish. Scottish clothing is, of course, very, very interesting and unique. Before I comment a little bit on it, let's go back to the chat, see what's going on. Latvia is underrated. Wales is a part of Ireland. Pilgrim. Oh, like as in the Welsh looks kind of pilgrim. Yeah, it sort of does. Sort of does. All right. So yeah, so Scottish is of course known most for the tartan. So keep in mind the word tartan just refers to like these kind of stripes that overlap. Um, yeah, to make this like square looking pattern, usually some kind of red and green combination. But yeah, I especially like the Scottish men's clothing, even though I'm not necessarily a huge fan of the kilt. But yeah, it looks very cool. All right, moving on, we got Swedes. Um, so, not too much to see here. It's not bad. Guy looks kind of depressed though. All right, next we get to Norwegians. Norwegian clothing is actually called the bunad. It's one of the few names I'll remember for this presentation. But yeah, I think it looks pretty cool. And it is still worn on like some formal occasions, uh, but not that often. But yeah, Norwegian clothing I find is quite nice. All right, moving on, we get to Icelanders, and they have this very funky hat. I forget what it's called. But yeah, it was commonly worn by women.
So dumb.
My brother just says so dumb. Yeah. All right, and then we get to English. And so we can see sort of there's like some variety among clothing with English people. So this is more your typical English country clothing. So what people would wear, especially on their rural estates, you know, hunting clothes, that kind of stuff. And then this was more everyday, at least back in the day. So yeah, we can sort of see what I was talking about with Germanic people with the stockings here and the hat. And you notice all the men in all these slides are all wearing hats. All right, and then we get to Dutch, and this I have to say is very goofy looking, both the man and the woman. This guy's pants kind of oversized, and her hair, very interesting.
Looks so
But yeah, Dutch clothing was unique, let's just say. All right, so now we'll go back to chat, see what's going on in the chat. England, you mean North France? Iceland should Belgium to Norway? I don't know what he's even talking about. Um, I don't know if Dutch people are real. Hey, I've met enough Dutch people to know they are actually real. All right, then we get to the Afrikaners. So the Afrikaners are basically the descendants, mostly of Dutch people in South Africa, hence the name. It's kind of obviously there, the name. And yeah, the men sort of have this colonial looking outfit that we see over here. And that was common among many Europeans in like hotter climates, so Australia, Texas, um, those kind of areas. All right, then we get to German. This is one of my favorite. I think German clothing, especially for women, looks very nice. But the men is also kind of distinctive, even if it looks a bit goofy. Um, but yeah,
yeah, they all look like Liam.
it is also, I should specify, a bit more influenced by Bavaria rather than all of Germany. But still, generally, it was the common style that we saw. And so, of course, we have these, the lederhosen, very long socks, all that stuff. But German is up there as one of my favorites. All right, then we move on to Greek. And so, for example, especially if you guys see on the left here, this is something I saw when I was in Greece, actually. This was the traditional style of the soldiers. And the reason why is because during the Greek War of Independence, which was about 200 years ago, the Greek soldiers actually did just wear this. So this guy here is actually a veteran of the Greek War of Independence. And you can see sort of looks similar to the Albanian clothing that we saw at the very start. And then the women, yeah, pretty similar to a lot of the rest of Europe. All right, moving on, we get to Italian. And I have to say, I quite like the Italian style. Very
Dude,
nice.
there's not a single Italian who's ever dressed like this. I've never
I
seen.
mean, this is traditional. It's not now, of
Bro, I've
course.
never seen a single Italian with any dress like that.
But yeah, Italian used to look pretty good back in the day.
No, give me this mismatch of
My brother heavily disagrees. Let's see. Okay. Oh, we have a bunch of German nationalists in the chat. Deutschland über alles. Long live Germany. Long live Prussia. Long live Austria. Greece not real country. Turk is best country. Italian Roma part of Turkey. Remember Battle of Yes. Yes. I mean, Italy would have some more variation for sure, but of course, I couldn't include everything. But generally, a lot of the Italian clothing sort of converged around the same thing. All right, so let's move on. So then we got to Sicilian, right? No explanation needed. This is just what's going on in Sicily. But yeah, that's a variation specifically found on that island. All right, then we get to French. I have to say the headgear is pretty interesting. Not sure exactly what we even call this. But I would say it looks kind of cool. Yeah, I feel like we're gonna get a lot of mean comments in the chat regarding the French. Let's see. Okay, no one said anything mean about the French so far. That's nice. Hey, we got the Catalan, right? So it's the area around Barcelona. And yeah, the men have these long, I don't even know what these are called. Same thing the women were wearing essentially. And yeah, they're interesting also because they're Latin people, but they also had the same kind of stocking things going on.
Looks so goofy.
We got Occitans. So Occitans, in case you don't know, are in the south of France. And so yeah, I think looks pretty nice. They had I'm trying to remember what this thing is called, the pointy hat, but I can't remember what it is. All right, then we get Friulian. So Friuli is a region in northeastern Italy, and yeah, they also speak a Romance language. But yeah, I thought it was pretty cool, even if the hat has a bit too many decorations, in my opinion. But yeah, thought it was interesting. And next we get to Galician. I always thought this picture was pretty cool. Here we have Spanish, of course, very iconic, very unique, distinct from the rest of Europe. You know, the women have these very flowy, long dresses called, I think, the traje de flamenco, which is used for flamenco dancing. And of course, this is what was worn by matadors. So I'll just pause a little longer for on the Spanish one, so I think it's cool. Let's check the chat again. I love France till the French Revolution. What's this guy doing talking about anti-Semitism? We haven't even got to the Jews yet. Allahu Akbar, long live Al-Andalus. All right, next we have Portuguese. I think Portuguese looks pretty cool. Quite like it. Very nice patterns. Yeah, they have these sort of interesting high heels going on here. We get to Romanian. So yeah, especially for the men, looks much more Eastern European. We can see once again the boots are making a comeback, as well as the fur hats called ushankas. Istro-Romanians. So the Istro-Romanians are basically, I think they're in Istria, which is in Italy, although maybe they are in Romania. I don't really remember, but yeah, you're interesting. We got the Sami. So Sami are like the indigenous people of the Arctic, at least in Europe, in Scandinavia. They have pretty simple clothing, but yeah, a lot of it is blue, red. And then the Vepsians, probably have never heard of them, but they also live up there, northern Russia, same area. Same with the Mordvin people, and they actually have a very unique national costume called the Mordovian national costume. But yeah, these are all like not Altaic. I'm trying to remember. Finno-Ugric, I think, is the name. Same with these guys, the Mari. I always thought she had a very friendly looking face. She could be a waitress, who knows? We get to the Hungarians. Hungarian clothing is quite unique, actually, as is the Hungarian language. They might have this very big hat here, whatever it's called. And yeah, very interesting language, as you can see. And we get to the Basques, and the Basques are very interesting because they're pretty much some of the only non-Indo-European people, and I think the only ones who are the descendants of the old Europeans. So all other Europeans are descendants from either the Indo-Europeans or later wave of migrants. So yeah, and the Basques also invented the beret, so that's why this guy is wearing a beret. So the beret is not actually French, it's Basque. All right, so let's go back. I remember playing a game in CK3. I played a Catholic Nordic nation, crusade against the Sami. The Sami destroyed our crusade. We had everyone, the armies Europe together. Drum boon toba. But I don't even know what this guy's talking about. All right. Maltese. Maltese are interesting. They're actually a Semitic people. So they're like related to Arabs and all that, but they're Christians. And then yeah, here's where we get to non-European people. but still had similar clothing. So we got the Kurdish people, got their baggy pants. Persian people, of course, live in Iran, main group there. The Lur also live in Iran, and I thought their clothing was pretty cool. I like these patterns. I'm not sure exactly what we'd call them, but look quite cool. Yeah, and here we have the Assyrian people. And so, yes, these are the very same Assyrians who once had a massive empire back in the 8th century BC. They destroyed the kingdom of Israel. And then they basically got crushed by the Babylonians and never became a powerful people again. But there is actually a small Assyrian community still around, although a lot of them got genocided by the Ottomans um, at the end of World War One. Also, another fun fact, they're one of the few Christian communities in the Middle East that still exist today. And yeah, I think Assyrian clothing is some of the coolest I've seen. And of course, then we have their genociders. The next slide, the Turks. Now, of course, it does look a little more Middle Eastern, especially with this. I'm not sure if this is a fez, but it definitely looks like a fez. And I think fezes were invented by the Turks.
She looks trans.
My brother says this girl looks trans. We'll see. Now let's go to the comments. Turk, Turk, Turk. Yeah, this guy here loves Turks. So that's pretty cool. Then we got the Khorasani Turks, and they're a different group of Turkic peoples in Khorasan, hence the name. Here we have the Louisiana Creole people, and who are they? Well, they were basically descendants of French people who mixed with the African slaves in Louisiana, and so they developed their own unique ethnicity and culture. And yeah, they famously had this sort of headband that they would wear, so that's why they're all kind of have that, which was influenced by West African style. Now, then we have the Tagalog. Now, you might say, okay, why are we including Southeast Asians here? This is European clothing. Well, the Tagalog actually ended up adopting European styles from the Spanish, and hence that's why they don't really dress like the rest of Filipinos. Although we will get to Filipino later. And finally, we have, I think finally, maybe we have one more slide in this part, but yeah, we have African Americans. Of course, they also got disconnected from their culture, and so they ended up wearing the sort of clothing that was common in the United States, and hence what we see here. Go back to chat.
It's Reverend Louis and his kids.
Tagalog are based in regards to that. A water bottle. Yeah. All right. And also Afro-Surinamese. So yeah, Suriname was a Dutch colony, and the African slaves were influenced by Dutch clothing a lot. This explains, this guy wearing a three-piece suit. All right, and then that's done. So now I have Caucasian people. So, contrary to popular belief, uh, most Caucasians are not what we call so-called white people. They're mostly Middle Eastern people. I'll get into why they're called that another time, but yeah, Caucasian clothing is very distinct, and we will see it throughout the presentation. But there's certain characteristics we see with all these Caucasian peoples, and so it becomes quite recognizable. All right, so basically it was pretty similar to European clothing, but there were two items that were worn by basically all Caucasians. One was the choka, and the other one is the papaka. And the choka is a woolen coat with a high neck, with wide sleeves and short sleeves, and they often had loops and buttons. And one thing that was universal was the distinctive cases that were added to place cartridges, which made it possible to load a gun at full gallop because Caucasians were very, very warrior-like people. And then they would wear long, tight trousers that were also specifically made to facilitate horseback riding. And then there was the papaka, which was a high cylindrical wool hat that was also worn by men and was considered an extremely important part of a man's identity. For women, it was pretty similar to Europeans, with dresses being worn. although they also had to have their head covered, especially because many of them were Muslims. And so this was commonly done with a veil. The other thing is that they could cover their head with a pillbox hat, which is a hat with a flat crown and straight upward sides and no brim. And then they would place the kilagai, which is a square-shaped headscarf with special prints. All right, so now let's look at what I'm actually talking about. First, we have the Dargan people. Again, we can see, right, the head's covered with a veil. And the guy back, same thing, right? And we also will see a lot of these round metal things here. And yeah, so this is what I'm talking about here. So this Balkar guy, as we can see, right, he has the papaka, right? So the round fur hat, and then he has this area to place his cartridges. Of course, it isn't really used anymore to have place bullets and all that, but back in the day it was. So this was common among all the different all the men in the Caucasus. And then here he's wearing the choka, which is the general outfit. So we see the same thing with this guy, the Lezgin. I also think it's a very cool looking picture. Almost gives you like a glimpse of the past here. And yeah, there we have his gun right there. The Tabasaran, so again we see has the veil on her. Kabardian. Also another thing too, you'll notice a lot of these are pictures of dances, and they have these almost ballerina looking shoes. Um, but yeah, once again, he's wearing the papaka here and the choka.
That guy's so gay.
My brother says he looked gay. All right, here we have the Armenians, who are perhaps some of the most well-known Caucasian people. Again, the man, same deal, right? We see the bullet cartridges. The Ossetians, so once again, the choka, the main thing, the cartridges over here. He has a gun, and of course, he's wearing the papaka. And also, I have to say, he has a very cool beard. This was clearly photographed by a Russian, so we can see it says something Ossetian, and then I can't really read the rest of this because I'm not Russian and I don't know the Cyrillic script. But I know enough of it to know this says Ossetian. All right. Then we get the Azerbaijanis. So again, once again, sort of the same deal. He's not wearing a papaka, or a choka, but he is wearing a papaka on his head. Georgian guy is a little bit different. He's sort of wearing like a more triangular thing. We have the Akvak. I think these people are Muslims because you can kind of tell from the shape of her veil. It's probably Islamic. But yeah, more of these round metal things. The Avars.
I like this one.
The Avars were actually a very powerful so-called barbarian group that invaded Europe back in the 7th century, I want to say, and they established a major khanate. But then it got destroyed, and so the rest of them fled to the Caucasus and became a small group there. So we got the same thing going on with the Ingush. Once again, we see the cartridges, we see the choka, and we see the papaka on his head. And yeah, you can also tell by the kind of head covering if they're Muslim or Christian generally, right? So you can see her hair, so she's probably Christian. This is probably one of the coolest pictures I ever saw. This Kumyk guy has a huge choka, or papaka, sorry, on his head, and a lot of cartridges all across his shirt. Probably a very respected warrior back in his time. All right, so that's the end of Caucasians. We get to now Turkmen and Bashkir. So it was pretty similar to Caucasian clothing, but there were some key differences. So instead of the papaka being worn, the kalpak was worn, which is a different kind of hat. It was also made out of fur, but was a bit wider and was usually white instead of black. And then the men would wear white shirts decorated with embroidery and trousers, and for footwear would wear boots, while women would wear dresses, often with intricate embroidery, but didn't necessarily tend to wear boots. So here's an example. This is Turkmen people, of course, main group in Turkmenistan. And so we see here that they are wearing the kalpak. Yeah, I think it looks pretty cool. All right, so that's it. Now we get to Arab and North African clothing, which is now significantly different. So one of the main differences, of course, is that men and women would wear tunics instead of wearing trousers. And the main type was called the thawb. which was a long-sleeved ankle-length traditional robe, and it was usually white, and it would be worn with a keffiyeh, which was a headdress made from a square scarf, and usually held with an agal or a black cord placed around the keffiyeh to keep it on the head. Of course, there was also the turban, which we all know, a hat based on cloth winding, which also had a practical purpose in the desert and became a symbol of Islam. And women, of course, would wear some kind of dress that covered the whole body except the feet, hands, and head. And this robe was often black. Of course, in Islam, it's very crucial that women don't show their hair. But this was also even common among non-Muslims, such as Jews, because again, they cared a lot about modesty. And in terms of footwear, they could wear anything from sandals to the very large shoes of the Tuareg, which we will see soon. All right, let's go back to the chat. Okay. So this guy says Caucasian clothing is probably my favorite. I'm really glad. Oh, he says, hang on, I can't see anything. Oh, he can see now. Okay, great. Okay, glad to see you're still in the chat. I thought everyone had left. Okay, so we'll now look at some Arab and North African clothing. Okay, so first we have the Baloch. The Baloch actually live in Pakistan and Iran too. And so they're a bit different from their neighbors, as in most of these people are either in Arabia or North Africa. But yeah, this is obviously very Arab North African looking. The Shilha are, I believe, in Algeria, and they are a Berber people, and we'll be seeing the Berbers quite soon. Um, and yeah, the Berbers basically they had more intricate clothing because a lot of their clothing developed before Islam. A lot of jewelry, but still covering their head, as you can see. Here we have the actual Berber people, and they were all across North Africa. They were like the native people of North Africa before the Arabs invaded. So yeah, a lot more decoration. Um, these ones are probably not as devout Muslims as you can probably tell from their hair. But yeah, a lot of Berbers who are Muslims would have their hair covered. You have the Mizrahi Jews. So Mizrahi is basically just a term for the Jews in the Islamic world. And a lot of these Jews were kicked out basically after the first Arab-Israeli War in 1948. So I actually think these Jews in particular in this picture were actually refugees fleeing from one of the Muslim countries after that war. Maghrebi Jews, so they lived in Maghreb, in other words, North Africa. And they had very cool clothing, but even though they're not Muslims, they're also covering their hair, as one can see here. I always thought this woman looked quite nice in her clothing. And then Yemenite Jews, which look very, very interesting. Probably some of the most insane decoration. Like this is, she's decked out in jewelry. And basically, this is what Yemenite Jewish women would wear for their weddings. So a whole lot of necklaces, um, very tall hat, a lot of flowers, although she doesn't look particularly happy here. But yeah, Yemenite Jewish clothing was quite unique. And of course, we get Arabs. So before we get to Arabs, let's just check the chat again. Okay, great. Okay, then we get to Arabs, right? Who, of course, are the most well-known of these groups. So this guy is wearing what I was talking about, right? This is the thawb, the white robe. This is the keffiyeh, or basically the red head garment. And I think this is called the agal. I forget what I said. I was reading off a script there. Now I'm just kind of going off solo. All right, then we have Sudanese Arabs who are not really Arab at all. If we look at them, you can see they're pretty clearly of sub-Saharan descent. And yeah, also have very goofy looking shoes. So these are like, I'm not sure how these are practical. But yeah, here we can see them, they're wearing the turban. And you can kind of tell these people spend a lot of the time in the desert, so their clothing is adapted for that kind of environment. And we got Maghrebi, and this is some of the funniest I've ever seen. So the man here, he's sort of wearing, um, yeah, kind of a coverall robe with a hoodie. And this is very common in the Maghreb. So again, this is North Africa. But the woman, I mean, what can we say? Is there anything to say about? You can see, I'm trying to see if this is like her eye. I don't know if this is even her eye. Maybe it's just like her forehead or something. But yeah, you can see from the background, probably she's inside a mosque. Also, of course, like the rest of her body is also completely covered up. And yeah, it wasn't that uncommon for Maghrebi women to basically go around in something similar to this. So they really took modesty to like 100%.
It's easily the worst on the list.
I always imagine Walcadian emperors wearing turbans. Maghrebi clothing, legit medieval wizards. Just need a long beard. Welcome to the College of Winterhold. Also, with Maghrebi women, they took modesty too far. Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I mean, maybe it's a bit unholy for me, but I think that's just a little bit too much modesty, as in, like, you literally have no idea what's going on. Yeah. All right. So let's move on to next. We got the Egyptians, of course, very famous.
Oh, it's
And
raining.
Egyptians are,
You bring up.
yeah. And Egyptians are like, they'll say they're Arabs, but genetically, most Egyptians are kind of just the same people that were there during ancient Egypt. And so, of course, there's admixture. I mean, they've been conquered by the Persians, the Romans, the Greeks, and of course, the Arabs for the longest time, and the Turks a little bit as well. But nevertheless, though, Egypt is still very influenced by Arab cultures. We can see this guy's wearing some kind of thawb, although maybe a looser version, and of course, he's wearing a turban. All right, we got to Maronites. So, Maronites are a group of people in Lebanon who are Christians. And so they are one of the few Christian communities within the Middle East. And as with the Maghrebis, let's just say some of their modesty goes a little too far. I have to say, this picture on the left looks quite cool. It's a very eccentric mix of styles, but the Maronite clothing, especially worn by the men, looks very cool. You can definitely tell it's Middle Eastern. You see the keffiyeh that this guy's wearing. This guy's wearing a fez. Of course, they have the curved sword, very common, um, and sort of baggy pants. And yeah, we see the same thing with the women, the baggy pants, sort of a turban here. But then I have no idea what this woman here in the middle is wearing. It's very, very strange. Egyptian Arabic is dominant Arabic speaking world. I used to know a Marinate. Okay, that's pretty interesting. Yeah. All right, next we got the Tuareg people. The Tuareg people are mainly um, located in the western area of the Sahara. Not Western Sahara necessarily, but places like Mali, Niger. Um, so they're very influenced by Arab culture, but I would say they're more genetically related to sub-Saharan Africans, as we can see from the dark skin. But of course, they're clearly wearing a turban and other clothing that you would definitely expect to see among a desert population. Now here we got the Beja people. I always thought this guy looked pretty cool. So the Beja are located on the Red Sea coast of Sudan. So this guy's just wearing a simple thawb here, the white robe. All right, then we get to Central Asian. Um, and Central Asian is pretty interesting. It's somewhat similar to Arab and North African, but um, there are some differences. So people still wear the turban, for example, um, but they'll also wear head hats that are more similar to the local climate, like the dopa, which is a black skull cap that was square with pointy edges, and the karakul, which is a peaked back black cap. And then men would not wear the thawb, but they would wear the kalat, which is a loose, long-sleeved robe that was worn by both genders. And because it is a very Islamic part of the world, women would have to wear similar clothing to Arab and North African women. And so they'd usually wear a paranja, which covered the head and the body, in a way that's similar to the niqab or the hijab. Or in Afghanistan, they would just wear a full-on burqa, which covers fully the body and the face, and basically only leaves a slit for the eyes. However, when I say Central Asian clothing, I mainly mean what's going on in Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. All right, so let's look at some examples. So first we have the Bukharan Jews. And of course, they're not Muslims, but they were quite influenced by the clothing around them. And I always thought this picture was very cool. It's an old picture that was colorized, but colorized at the time. And so that's why it doesn't look necessarily like a modern photograph
That's a Birkenau Jew.
of Bukharan. All right, then we get the Pashtun, the main group in Afghanistan. So most of the Taliban are from this group. And yeah, you can kind of tell from the way the women are dressed that, yeah, this is what the Taliban women would be wearing. So I'd say it's almost as bad as Maghrebi. Maghrebi, I have to say, is still the worst, but this comes very close. So here they're wearing the niqab, of course. Um, well,
That
the
one's
men
wearing.
here,
Look, that one's wearing high heels.
yeah, well, the men here are wearing a turban. Um, we can see, of course, very obvious Arab and North African influences, but also some local ones, especially with what the men are wearing. Okay, next we got the Uzbek people. Um, and the Uzbeks, I don't know, this may be just a slight improvement from the Pashtuns in terms of what the women are wearing. So she has a longer veil, but it's super.
No, Atlas. No, don't kill yourself.
Oh, my cat's trying to like jump off the edge.
Kill yourself.
Um, anyways, so yeah, anyways, I'm back. So yeah, so she basically fully covers her face. You can't see anything here. Full black veil. Man's a bit better, wearing the turban, or wearing the same kind of robe that we saw among the Pashtuns. But yeah, also I just noticed now you can't even see her hands. So you literally can't see anything with the Uzbeks. All right, so that's the end of that. Let's just check the comments real quick. Okay, there are no comments. Okay, let's get the Tajik and Uyghur. All right, so Tajik and Uyghur clothing was pretty beautiful in my opinion because of the very intricate embroidery and patterns that was found on the women's dresses, which were often very colorful. Now, on top of this, they would wear a veil or a cape, which was decorated pretty similarly. However, because these groups were also Islamic, women would still cover their hair with what is known as a tubeteka, which is a kind of skull cap, but that did not cover necessarily all their hair, but which could still fall down uncovered from behind or the sides. All right, so the first example is the Tajiks, of course, lived in Tajikistan, although a lot of Tajiks lived in Afghanistan as well. Um, so yeah, I think it's pretty cool. Also very scenic photograph by whoever made this. And then the others, the Uyghurs. And this might become more important because the Uyghurs are now facing genocide. And so who knows how long it'll be before clothing like this completely disappears. Is that a woman or is it an egg for the Uzbeks? Yeah, yeah. I'm not sure. Violet, you missed the what is it called? Not the oh yeah, the Pashtuns, but then also the Maghrebis. But let's go back. Um okay. So yeah, we'll just go back. So Uzbek, right? This is the Pashtun, basically the same. Like you can't see anything. Although I guess at least you can see a tiny bit of skin on their foot. And then going back here, this is Maghrebi. This one was crazy. Couldn't see anything there. Yeah, just let me know if you're able to see that. Yeah, who find Uzbek wear? I find the Pashtun worse, but whatever. It's all kind of the same. Yeah, it literally is just an eye. All right, so now let's go forward. So we did Uzbek, Tajik, Uyghur. Okay, now we're gonna get to Kazakh and Kyrgyz. All right, so Kazakh and Kyrgyz clothing reflected their nomadic and their steppe background very strongly, and most of their clothing was made from horsehair, fox, fur, wool, or rabbit hides. For headgear, they would generally wear the kalpak, which is a high-crowned cap that would keep the head warm in the winter and provide shade in the summer. For coats, the chapan was usually worn during the winter, which had intricate threading and a variety of colors and patterns. And men would wear two types of skin shirts, inner and outer trousers with silk patterns and fur, and loose-fitting robes. Then jackets were also dark with a cloth lining and decorated with traditional patterns. Meanwhile, women would wear a shirt known as a koylek, and on top of this, they would wear a coat known as a kupe. And it was usually lined with fur or wool and would be embroidered. So that's a lot of words, so let's just visually see this so you understand a little better what I'm talking about. So first of all, here we have the Kazakh people, of course, they're in Kazakhstan. And yeah, very much obviously a nomadic Central Asian kind of looking clothing of what you'd expect. In fact, this guy is literally riding a horse in this picture. So the women, as we can see, their heads are covered, which again is, of course, common for Muslim women. Um, but yeah, the Kazakh guy especially sort of almost looks Mongolian, right? Which makes sense because it has similar climate. Very hot in the summer, very cold in the winter. And I assume this probably was more made in the winter based on the kind of clothing. And then for Kyrgyz, and Kyrgyz clothing was pretty interesting. So again, the hair is covered, but it's like not super necessarily Islamic, so to say. And they have, I'm trying to remember, I think it's called pleated dresses. Basically, when you have several of these layers, it's called a pleat. And so yeah, it looks very cool, very unique. Now let's check the chats. Oh yeah, Micah's greatest challenge, Kyrgyz. Yeah, trying to pronounce that. I love Kazakhstan. You very nice place. From plains of Tarashek to northern fence of Jewtown. Ah, I see. Guy's probably making a Borat joke. I never watched it, but it seems to be the only thing Kazakhstan is known for these days. By the way, okay, let's see what he's gonna say. Okay. Also, Violet, if you're still here, this is where we get to India, so you might be interested in watching this next part. My cat's getting very close to the computer, so if I slightly delay, that might be why. Okay, cool. All right, so now we get to South Asian clothing. This part's going to be a tad longer, but we will read it nevertheless because South Asian is very important. So of course, South Asia, which again writes India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, um, Nepal, right, that area. They did all have the same clothing style. This is a huge group of people. This is like almost 2 billion people living here. But of course, there are certain common characteristics. Women would wear the sari, a robe with one end attached to the waist, while the other one would rest over the shoulder like a shawl. It would be worn with a choli, which was a blouse that's been worn since the first millennium BC, and also a gagra choli, which is a combination of a skirt and a blouse. And this is because it combines the choli with the lehenga, or an ankle-length skirt. It would be combined with the dupatta, or a long shawl-like scarf that's worn across both shoulders and around the head. And the lehenga would mainly be worn during festivals and special events, such as weddings. For their head, meanwhile, men would wear the pagri, or a type of turban, which could take several forms, sorry. For the main kind of clothing, the sherwani was pretty common, which was a long-sleeved outer coat that is buttoned down the front and falls below the knees. And as well, they would wear churidars, which are tight trousers worn by men and women, and usually worn with a shalwar kameez, which is a combination of trousers and a tunic and a kurta, or a loose collarless shirt, that actually traces its roots to Central Asian tunics. Now, of course, back in the day, shoes were sometimes worn, but generally, a lot of people didn't wear shoes. All right, so now let's look at some examples, although, of course, Probably most people have met South Asians in their life, so it's not necessarily super uncommon. We start off with the Kashmiri people in Kashmir, and because it's a controversial subject, I will not be discussing whether I think Kashmir is part of India or Pakistan. I will just say it is Kashmir, and I'll let you guys in the comments decide which country it belongs to. But yeah, sort of we see the trousers here, the shirt. These men here, I believe, probably are Hindu. You can, especially with the red, probably red. I can't tell, but it's probably the red dot that's very commonly worn with Hindus. So we see that here. All right, this is the Shina people. I forget what part of India they live in, honestly. The Khas. So the Khas are the main group in Nepal, actually. And this guy here on the right is wearing what's known as the Nepali national costume. So you can see has this kind of longer shirt that this guy's wearing alongside the hat and the trousers as well. Although we can also see a more traditional form of clothing that was worn by the Khas over here. So yeah, Khas main group in Nepal. All right, then we have Dogra people, and I know who took the picture because he wrote it right here, Raj Kumari Dr. Jyotsna Singh. And yeah, so this woman is sort of wearing what's similar to a sari, the veil. Punjabi people. So yeah, these people don't look like they're having a lot of fun. They probably did some hard labor. And yeah, Punjab is an area that's in both shared by India and Pakistan. And a lot of them are Sikhs, but there are also a lot of Muslim Punjabis as well. So I think the capital of Pakistan is within Punjab, if I'm not mistaken. All right, so now let's go to the comments real quick and then we'll continue. Kashmir is a part of Sweden. Give Kashmir back to Sweden. Free Kashmir. Just give them turbans. Yeah, so this guy has a very interesting kind of turban, the Saraiki guy, and I think Saraikis live in northern India, but I could be mistaken. I'm trying to remember my general Indian geography and culture. The Sindhi, so they live in Sindh. Sindh is an area that is basically right southwest of, no, not southwest, southeast, sorry, of Pakistan. It's a part of India, and it has a drier climate, so an example of Sindhi woman, and yeah, she is wearing the typical Indian trousers as well as the veil over her head. All right. These are the Marwari people who live in Marwar, which I also think is in northwestern India generally, but again, I'll need to check up on my geography there. But yeah, we sort of see, the man's wearing the wide baggy trousers, and whereas the woman, again, wearing the veil. We see this veil all across, Indian subcontinent, and a lot of jewelry, and especially like sort of rings. So we see them here on her arm and also on her feet over there. Gujarati people, I know it's a bit of a blurry picture, but yeah, live in Gujarat, which is also more northern and western part of India. Saurashtra people, the Banjara. I don't think they're a very big group because I never heard of them before. And these people look, yeah, probably a little poorer. But you also notice another thing, they're all pretty much wearing nose rings. But like not the liberal kind of nose rings where it like goes through your, both nostrils. Um, just one side. Seems to all be in their left nostril for some reason. Not sure exactly why that is. Of course, we get the Hindi people, who of course are one of the largest groups in India. And their language is the most spoken in India, other than maybe English. I don't know if they're more English or Hindi speakers. Probably more Hindi speakers, but who knows? Either way, it's the largest native language to the area, and that's what matters. Then we got the Deccani people. So the Deccan Plateau is sort of more western central India. But yeah, I thought I was like this picture. Maybe it's the background. I thought it was a pretty cool background. Also has nice jewelry over there. Then we have the Indo-Caribbean people. And so yeah, I have actually included the Indian diaspora for this as well. So even though she's not in South Asia, this is actually from Trinidad. We can see it written down here. Obviously, the clothing is from India. And so we can see that style of clothing was brought in by the Indians who went to the Caribbean there. The Assamese, Assam is in northeastern India. It's one of the easternmost parts of India. And yeah, I always thought this picture was cool too. These two look like they're vibing, having a good time together. Not sure what this is. First thought it was cigar, but probably not. Bengali people, one of the biggest groups in India, and of course the main group in Bangladesh, but also in surrounding areas like Kolkata. So this is actually a famous painting. I forget by who, but I think it depicts, yeah, Bengali woman sometime in the 18th or 19th century. And then this is a
Was
man,
she
and he's
white?
just probably because she's rich. And then this guy is just working out in the salt. You can also see sort of a difference here in skin color too, because this guy's out more in the sun, whereas she probably stays indoors most of the time. Okay, now let's go back to the chat. Okay, Hindavi. Okay, maybe I should use that word. I'm not sure. Painting on the left, super popular. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen it before. I'm trying to remember what the name of the painting is and who painted it. But yeah, it was painted, I think, during British rule in India. Is this Sylheti? So it's interesting. You can kind of tell even just from the pose here what kind of dance they're doing, and is a dance that's common in northeastern India. Also from the features here, they definitely look more South Asian, but they also look a little bit more East or Southeast Asian. Well, that's because the Sylheti are probably a little mixed with the Eastern Asians who live near where they live. But we can tell obviously from the clothing and from their general look that they are for sure, more South Asian culturally. Here's an example of, yeah, an East Asian person and a South Asian person. So I'm assuming again this is probably on the border, maybe with Myanmar or China, the Bhojpuris. So this Nagpuriya woman is, yeah, wearing a sari. So this is sort of what I was talking about, sort of wrapped around here at the waist, and then with one part draped over the shoulder. So it's a very common kind of clothing we see. And this would be in the Nagpur region of India, which I think is northeast. But again, if I'm wrong, please correct me in the chat. I need to learn my Indian geography better. Odia people are found in Odisha, I want to say, or is it Orissa? I'm not sure how exactly you pronounce that place, but that's also sort of eastern India. Marathi people, Maharashtra, I think, and that's more southern and western part of India. And so this woman here, I think, because I looked a little bit into the picture, I think she was part of the upper class. So that's why you can tell probably from the background she's pretty well off. But yeah, she's also wearing a sari here. And again, we see, right, the covered head and then the red dot. So a Hindu. All right, let's go back to the chat. Bhojpuris are in Bihar. Okay, good to know. Okay, Odisha and Orissa. Okay, there we go. So I got both of them correct. Um, yeah, because I remember I did some research on India once for a video, and so I started learning some of the provinces. Okay, so Sinhalese, they're the main people in Sri Lanka, and we can see their clothing is much more simple. And also, it's a bit different. They're not covering their head, they're not really wearing a sari. But the reason why is because Sinhalese are Buddhists and they're not Hindus. And so that probably is a major influence on their style of clothing. And also, they live on an island, so they're more isolated, I guess, from the rest of the subcontinent. All right, moving on. Maldivians, they live in the Maldives, an area that might not even exist for that long. But she's taking a very nice, leisurely stroll on the beach. No idea where these guys are, the Gadaba, but I think they're probably one of the tribal peoples in India. All right, the Tamil. So Tamil live in Tamil Nadu as well as part of Sri Lanka. There was actually a big war between the Tamils and the Sinhalese back in the day, and some of the Tamils were terrorists. But yeah, um, yeah, Tamils are a very important group in India. Again, sort of the southeastern tip of the country, as well as northeastern Sri Lanka. And this dance, I'm trying to remember what it's called because I looked into it. I think it's called the Bharatanatyam dance. And yeah, it's probably the most popular kind of dance, traditional dance at least, within South Asia. And so we can see they have a very interesting kind of lower garment because it sort of looks like a dress, but it also is kind of trousers as well. So it's like an interesting mix there between the two. And then we can see this red dot here, like here on the head, but also palms and the feet. So I'm actually wondering, like, someone knows what does the red dot mean exactly? Seems to be very common all across this region. The Kannadiga speak the Kannada language, and so that's pretty interesting. That's the main reason I remember them, but has absolutely nothing to do with Canada. Then Malayali people live in Malayalam, I think, and I think that's also somewhere southern India, but I'm not 100% sure of that fact. Well, I shouldn't say it's a fact if I don't know, but not 100% sure. But yeah, these people look like they're probably going to a temple based on the way they're dressed. Um, so let's go back to the chat. Okay, it's called Aputu. Oh, okay, we live in Kerala, not Malayalam. Oh, okay. Oh, so this is your people. Okay, great. So we have a Malayali guy in the chat. That's cool. All right, the Kota. I always thought they were interesting just because of like this guy's look and also his weird hairstyle. And I mean, this is a woman. I think this is a man, although maybe it's a woman. I really don't know. Maybe they're trans. The Kodava. Now, this is one of the most interesting ones for very obvious reasons. Kodava have a very interesting kind of, I guess, outfit that they use for dances to the point where everything, like literally their entire body except their feet here, are covered. And the amount of jewelry and just other accessories is kind of insane. So I'll just stay here a little longer so we can look at the Kodava clothing. But yeah, I believe this is for some kind of dance that they wear this. Because the guys in the background are just wearing much simpler clothing. And yeah, to be honest, no idea what part of South Asia they live in. But yeah, as you can see, a lot of the clothing is cool, which is why I have a lot of South Asian examples here. Telugu, I do know they live in southern India, but I can't remember the state at all. But this is clearly a wedding, right? You can see they're smiling, they're holding hands, right? They're dressed very well. They both have the, lots of wreaths and flowers and jewelry all over. They're playing footsies down here too. Also, his feet is huge. It's crazy. Anyways, so yeah, this is a wedding with the Telugu people. Chenchu, I think they're tribal
These
people.
guys look like they have pineapples on
Yeah, Murad said they look like they have pineapples on their head. Same with the Gandhi people, not to be confused with Gandhi. So yeah, similar groups. Oh yeah, and I think this is the last one. Indian South Africans, and obviously from the name you can tell where they live. It's actually a decent sized Indian community in South Africa. And yeah, generally for South Asians, I quite like their clothing. I think it looks pretty cool. Very nice decorations, lots of jewelry. They try their best to look good. So, oh, actually, there are a couple more. Dimasa, Brokpa, I think, live in Nepal. And because of the different climate, that's why their clothing looks a little more different there. And yeah, so there we go. Now we're gonna get Siberian, but let's check the chat. Okay, so the Telugu people live in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. India should be a model for American development when it comes to regional stability. What exactly do you mean by that? I'm just curious. You can type it in the chat. Um, we got split into two states because one was going to be more Hyderabad focused, and the other one was less focused on that. Oh, okay. The idea is that in India, no one is more Indian than other Indians. I see. Same with the US. But India's been playing this game longer. All right, so we're done with South Asia now, so we can move more to North Asia. So yeah, Siberian, there's not much to really say here. Of course, unsurprisingly, it is made to fit in with the harsh climate, and so features a lot of animal hides and fur. And these are often used to line the edges of clothes and hoods. And of course, generally big, thick coats are worn because if not, you'll freeze to death. Also, one interesting thing is that the women also did wear a veil a lot of the time around their hair, even if they were wearing a hoodie as well. All right, so let's look at some examples of Siberian clothing. First, we have the Selkuk people. Keep in mind, these are all going to be, right, Siberia, so all in current day Russia. The Evenk, I think the Evenk have their own autonomous area within Russia. The Ulch, very cool fur hoodie she's wearing over here. The Dolgan, the Nivk people. I thought this was a very cool looking picture here. Very nice embroidered coat that she's wearing. Okay, and so that's sort of it. And now we'll go to Mongolians. Ulch seems based. Yeah, I agree. Nivk is a bit weird. Just wondering why do you find it weird? West Siberian. Okay, fair enough. All right, so now let's move on to Mongolian. So Mongolian clothing featured long robes for both genders, with men often wearing a tight square hat on top of their head, while women would wear unique and pointy hats that tended to be somewhat triangular, but could also have big ear flaps, many hanging beads, a protruding front, or a large and narrow rectangle pointing straight up. And so there's a lot of variety there. Men and women's robes were also long, but men's tended to be a little bit shorter, while women's tended to be a little more colorful and decorated. And underneath for footwear, they would wear boots, usually made out of leather. All right, so let's get started. Here we have the Tuvan people, and this is sort of the hat. I was having a really hard time describing what shape this hat is, but yeah, this kind of a hat's very common across Mongolian peoples here. And yeah, you can see this guy is doing that famous Mongolian throat singing, so we can kind of already imagine that playing in the background. Um, so that's pretty cool. All right, this is the Uyghur, not to be confused with the Uyghur people. And I think they live in Western Mongolia. And yeah, same thing, interesting kind of pointy hats for the women, and they're all wearing robes here. The Dar people, and these guys are probably at some fashion show based on how things are here, but we can see the black boots, black leather boots that both of them are wearing, as well as the interesting hat for the woman. Buryats. So the Buryats actually live in Russia, not in Mongolia, but they live right next to Mongolia and they have similar clothing, which is why I included it there. The Kalmyks. The Kalmyks are actually interesting. They live in Russia and not anywhere near Mongolia. The Kalmyks are descendants of Mongols who invaded Russia and then settled right near the Caucasus. So the Kalmyks are actually very close to the Caucasus and are the only Buddhists anywhere in that region. So Kalmyks are a very interesting group of people. We get to the actual Mongols themselves, right? And so here's sort of what I was talking about. You look at all these different hats worn by the women, and they're all very unique. We have the tall, hard ones here, the big flaps, lots of earrings and jewelry and all that. A whole wide variety, but they're all very colorful. Whereas the men, as we can see, much more simple, wearing once again those black leather boots. And yeah, generally more, I guess, typical hats, as we would call them here. Something that you wouldn't be surprised to see in a Western country. The Kachin Mongols, more in Eastern Mongolia, I believe. All right, next we get the Japanese. So before we get the Japanese, let's go back to the chat. Mongolian clothing, best part of the video. Hey, I'm glad you like it. Yeah, I think Mongolian clothing is pretty cool. Um, Kalmyks are Buddhist. Yep. How feels seeing this section? Hello, base department. All right, awesome. BRB for a while. Hey, that's fine, but just saying your favorite people, the Japanese, are coming up next. So, you might want to stay for that. But nevertheless, we are going to get started with the Japanese. They have their own section just because it's very, oh, should have had Japanese and Turkic connection. Of course, the Turks have a theory they're connected to Japanese. I'm not even surprised. Or probably more accurately, they believe Japanese people are Turks. Um, Keep in mind, I will be stopping the presentation once we're done East Asia, just because one, it's been a bit long, and also because I do have other things that I need to do. But I will be doing a part two at some later point, maybe next weekend, and I will cover Southeast Asia, the Americas, maybe Africa if I have the time. All right, so let's get to Japanese here now. So of course, Japanese traditional clothing is very famous worldwide, with the most famous example being the kimono, which is a wrapped front garment with square sleeves and a rectangular body. It was generally worn with an obi or a ribbon-like sash, and this was a practice that originated in the 17th century, and it also tended to be tied at the back. The kimono was also typically worn with a tabi or split-toed socks that were usually white, and they were worn with zori or Japanese sandals. They're usually decorated with dyed patterns that could feature gold and silver embroidery, and they usually had floral motifs, especially cherry blossoms. For men, their kimonos usually were black, blue, green, or brown. So, of course, here is an example, right? So the Japanese, they're both wearing a kimono, but his is much simpler, right? Just simple black and gray. They're both holding fans. The woman's is much more decorated, as we can see. So many floral motifs everywhere, lots of flowers. Looks like a whole art scene over here on her kimono. Again, both are wearing the white socks. Both are wearing the zori or the sandals. Um, and so, yeah, these guys, I don't know, maybe they're getting married. I'm not 100% sure. And then over here on the right, this is probably more what would be worn by the emperors and the empresses, at least on a daily basis. They would have cooler clothes for ceremonies and all that. Um, but yeah, we can see, right, very long Chinese-inspired robes. And yes, all this area is influenced by Chinese clothing, to no one's surprise. And yeah, here's another example, Ryukyuan, which was spoken on the Ryukyu Islands, the most famous of which is Okinawa. Um, and so it's similar to Japanese, but we can see there is somewhat of a difference there. And then finally, the Ainu. The Ainu are the native people of Hokkaido, or the northern island of Japan. And again, there are similarities, but you can still see, right, they have a local variety of this style. All right, so next we'll get to Korean. So yeah, Korean traditional clothing was known as the hanbok and has been worn since at least the 6th century. The upper part was known as the jogori and was a shirt with narrow sleeves that was worn by both genders. And underneath it was worn the baji, or a traditional Korean baggy and loose trouser by the men, while the women would wear the chima, which is a skirt that was wrapped around and was floor length with a wide waistband over the chest. And then the jacket that would be worn was called the magoja, that was originally worn by men and later adopted by women. So yeah, here's Korean. So yeah, this is sort of more the traditional style that we sort of see, especially at like weddings or recreations and all that. But this over here, it looks really stupid, but this is actually probably more commonly worn, especially by the average person. And it's weird because, of course, Korea, it's not like it's an Islamic country or anything. But yeah, for some reason they just didn't like. I think it was actually a foreigner thing where they didn't want to show their women to foreigners, so they made them cover up as much as possible. And so you get pseudo-Islamic vibes from Koreans here. So this is more upper class, this is more lower class. But yeah, we can see very huge, these are huge sleeves and also pretty wide dress as well. All right, so let's see. I would have been daimyo in the Middle Ages. I wish. Japanese bala armor is the most insane. Yeah, it really is. The Korean woman on the right, is she a ghost? Yeah, I have no idea. Um, maybe she is. Maybe she isn't. Another example is the Jeju people. Jeju is an island off the coast of South Korea. So this is more Korean looking clothing. All right, now we'll get to Chinese, Vietnamese. So the typical style that was worn in China and Vietnam was an upper garment with either a skirt or trousers worn underneath, though unsurprisingly, men tended to wear the trousers and women would wear the shirt, although either could wear either one if they chose to. So it wasn't like strictly divided by gender. Um, Now, usually a vest was worn as well as a large robe, and the large robe would be worn on top of all the clothing that they would wear. And this would usually have some kind of embroidery, usually representing flowers or animals. And then shoes would be worn, especially in China. Um, and there was no standard headgear, with a wide variety of hats and head decoration being worn. Okay, so let's start with the Manchus. For those of us who are interested in history, you probably heard of the Manchus, a tiny group back then, but even nowadays. But they conquered all of China and created the Qing dynasty, which was the last imperial dynasty in Chinese history. And they had a wide variety of clothes, which is why they're the only group in this presentation which has three pictures here. Um, but yeah, here we can see like a wedding, and then typical man, and then typical woman. You'll notice here she is actually wearing some kind of high heel. So not this type we're used to seeing in the West, but that's why we can't see her feet at all, because she's wearing these interesting platform high-heeled shoes. And then the women are also wearing this kind of interesting hat, whereas the men, they would wear more of a fur hat. Now we can't really see in this picture, but one thing the Manchus were very known for was forcing everyone, well, forcing all the men to wear a queue, which basically meant they would shave all their head except one part, and then they would grow that one part really, really long, and so they'd usually form a ponytail out of that. So yeah, this was you know, typical Manchu clothing we saw back in the day. Of course, the most famous Han Chinese. Um, Found especially for the women, the Han Chinese had very nice clothing. And Han Chinese was the hardest to research. There were so many options, like choosing a picture like took forever. But in the end, I settled on these two pictures because I think they best represented kind of the typical Han Chinese clothing. And of course, right, Han Chinese is basically what we think of as Chinese, speak Mandarin, all that. But yeah, we can see, sort of wearing a robe here, robes here as well, and then very nice intricate pattern. And this guy is wearing specifically what's known as a Shen Yi, which is the oldest kind of robe and the oldest known traditional kind of clothing we find in China. So yeah, now let's go back to the chat. The Jeju feels kind of Japanese and Korean with those hats. I agree. Poor Mike had to read through Vietnamese for these images. Can we get 100 likes just for this? Yes. Yo, Vietnamese, crazy, bro. Um, Vietnamese language, very, I have to say, very ugly looking language. Probably just because they're using the Roman script though, so that's kind of their own fault. Not sure why they made others do that. So the reason the Manchus forced everyone else to have uh, the long ponytail was as a way of submission, right? It was a way of forcing people to not do what they want just to show that they were in charge. That's why the Manchus did that. All right, the Dungan people. So the Dungan are actually located somewhere, I think, in northwestern China, and they led a big revolt against the Qing-controlled Chinese Empire back in the 1800s. But yeah, very similar to Chinese Hunanese. So Hunan is an area in southern China, and again, very obvious Chinese influences, Han Chinese influences there. Peranakans. I always thought this was a very cool looking image. Almost looks like taking place in the moment, but it was probably posed for. But yeah, the Peranakans were basically the Chinese who lived in Southeast Asia and specifically Malaysia. Um, yeah, I think Malaysia and Indonesia mainly. So yeah, again, we see the floral motifs. Not wearing shoes probably because she's in a hotter climate, as opposed to, for example, here, right? Uh, they're wearing very interesting looking shoes here. Same here. But yeah, um, it's one of my favorite pictures, Peranakans. The Benteng, also located in southeastern China. Same with the Tiochao. So a lot of these people might identify as, Chinese in general because I guess Chinese identity is very interesting where there's like a core ethnic identity, but there's also a greater Chinese identity. But they're all very similar clothing and culture. Cantonese, so Cantonese, named after Canton, also now known as Guangzhou. And so these people are located, Guangzhou, Hong Kong, Macau area. So we can see theirs is a little simpler, but still similar, right, to other Chinese kind of clothing. And then finally we get to Vietnamese, and this one's also one of my favorite pictures. I think she has very, very nice background, very cool red dress and hat that she's wearing. And yeah, just red everywhere. Another thing, red is a symbol of like good luck in uh, East Asian culture, so that's why we see a lot of red. This is red. This is kind of red. This is red. This is red. This is red. They're not wearing red here. This is also red, yeah. Because red is yeah, very good color in Chinese and Vietnamese. Then we get to Southeastern Chinese. So by this, I don't mean like they're ethnically Chinese, but they're just in the southeast of China. So these are more like the Zhuang and the Miao people, and they have different clothing. It's actually pretty different from most of the traditional Chinese clothing, with the most unique features being the very original and decorated headdresses, which we will see very soon. And I would say there's probably no other group in the world that wears this much jewelry around their head, with these headdresses often being made of metal and reaching to over a foot high above the head, with some metal circles even dangling over the forehead. And then they would also wear very heavy and thick necklaces that would often support even more metal jewelry that would be attached below them with dangles that could reach all the way below the waist. So let's look at some of this. First, we have the Hainan people. The Hainan live on the island of Hainan, which is an island basically between China and Vietnam. And this is sort of the headdress I was talking about, right? Very elaborate, probably made out of silver or something. I'm not exactly sure. But yeah, we see this, the necklace, the headdress. Same with the Zhuang people, again, once again, notice what they're wearing on their head. This is the main thing, although again, very thick necklaces that we see here. Achang, not as decorated, but still we see the same pattern. Fula is more simple. Let's just check the chat real quick and then we'll go back. The Dungan were Buddhists in Xinjiang, right? I think so. I think the Dungans were Buddhists. Cantonese outfit looks nice. I like the style. Vietnamese outfit is overdosing on red. I kind of agree. This much jewelry on the head. Yeah, it is pretty crazy the amount of jewelry they had on their head. All right, here we have the Miao people, which is a very funny name, but yeah, Miao people have some of the most insane headdresses ever. And this must be pretty heavy, I have to say. And then you look at this. This is just the main necklace, which is covering these little necklaces, which is covering all of this, which then covers all of this, right? So we see this whole, or so much jewelry, so much metal they're wearing, and then they're also dancing while doing it. So props to them. It probably requires a good amount of balance as well. But yeah, Miao people mainly live in southeastern China. Um, okay, and we are going to finish off with the Taiwanese. There's actually the Tibetans after this, but the Tibetans have similar clothing to Southeast Asians. So we're going to do that for next time. But we'll do the Taiwanese. So when we think of Taiwanese people, right, we think of Chinese people, but the Taiwanese or the Chinese only started settling in China in the 1600s. And so because this is sort of traditional and native clothing, we're not showing the clothing of the Chinese people, but the original Taiwanese people. So Taiwanese clothing was very varied and unique, and both genders would wear trousers and skirts, which was quite rare in the world. Women would wear a lot of jewelry, especially in the form of necklaces and decorations, on their very wide-brimmed round hats. And also, because the island's climate, they wouldn't wear any shoes. All right, so first example, the Atayal people. So again, right, clearly not very Chinese-looking clothes. In fact, it says here, manners of the savages in Formosa. So we can see what the people thought of, the photographer at least thought of these people. But yeah, these are the native people of Taiwan. Another example, this does look a little more Chinese. It says Aborigines women in Formosa. In other words, the Formosa was the old name for Taiwan. We got the Paiwan people in Taiwan. Yeah, I have to say this guy looks a little goofy, in my opinion at least. A very interesting hat though he has here, and very tight pants. So I don't know, maybe he was gay, maybe. Yeah. And I think I'll end it here. But yeah, guys, write your final thoughts on in the chat. We're gonna do, Southeast Asia next time. And also tell me what you thought of the presentation. Did you like it? Do you want to see a change in how I present it? Let me know. Yeah, Taiwan guy does look funny. Meow Bros meeting 16-year-old Twitter girl named Jessica Meow. Oh, Meow Bros when they meet Mao. Yeah, I mean, the Meow did have to live under Mao. Southeast Asia is going to be hard. Yes, it is hard because Southeast Asia has so much variety. And that's why I didn't want to, I'll save that for next time. But I'm glad you guys like this part. And yeah, we can organize it probably next weekend. We'll go over Southeast Asia. Um, and then we're probably going to at least try to do a little bit of the Americas as well, because I want to do that. But we've covered most of Asia, and of course, we've covered Europe. So it's not a bad start. All right, can't wait to see the vid. Glad you liked it. Thank you very much. I did work very hard on this, so I'm glad it's paying off. Even if we only have like 2 or 3 people in the chat, but 3 watching now. But hey, we'll get more people to watch. I'll also upload this as a standalone video. Yeah, Americas will be hard because so many natives. Yeah, there's a lot of native people and a lot of variety too, right? Like what people, the natives of Alaska are wearing is super different from Minnesota, which is super different from, New Brunswick, which is super different from Florida, which is super different from California, which is super different from Mexico, which is very different from Colombia. So yeah, there's so much variety. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for watching. I think I'm gonna just end. Yeah, no idea how the natives believe it even look. Well, yeah, next time you will find out. It is actually in the thumb. No, is it in the thumbnail? No, I didn't have space for it in the thumbnail. So we'll see it next time. All right. Well, thank you guys for showing up, especially Violet and Julius. See you guys.